Major breaking news. The United States Department of Justice, under Harmy Dylan's leadership in the Office of Civil Rights there, has just announced formally something we reported on previously, the official formation and launching of the Second Amendment unit within the Department of Justice. This is the first unit of its kind ever involving the right to keep and bear arms. Probably the first time the federal government has done anything like this since the 19th century when they created the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau being used, of course, to protect the Second Amendment rights of the former African-American slaves. So this is a big development, and I'm going to break down exactly what's about to happen, and then I'm going to give us a criteria, something I think has been lacking in the Second Amendment community, a criteria for assessing the good and the bad and the ugly of what this Department of Justice has been doing with respect to our Second Amendment rights. And I'm going to outline what I think is an appropriate chart to figure out whether or not they're doing a great job, good job, bad job, whatever it is, and if there's areas for improvement, how to identify those. All this is coming up right now. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the 4 Box of Dawn, a proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. All right, as you know, I've been renominated for the 2026 Gundy Award for the top voice of the Second Amendment, top voices of the 2A. You're able to vote every single day, once a day, from now until December 15th, in the category of top voices of the 2A, for Mark Smith, 4 Box of Diner. If you're so inclined to go to thegundies.com and do so, I'd appreciate your support to see if we can repeat with our victory from last year. Very exciting stuff and a great honor for me. All right, so we have a big announcement here, which we had previously flagged, but now it's official. The United States Department of Justice has just created a Second Amendment unit, a Second Amendment task force, if you will, that's been formalized, that is going to laser focus on protecting the right to keep and bear arms, including going after rogue anti-gun blue states and blue state jurisdictions, including, for example, cities. Now let's start with the announcement on X by Harmy Dylan, the attorney that runs the Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Justice. Now here is Harmy Dylan explaining in a video about what this unit is going to do, their goals, and the purpose of it. Here she is right here and right now.
Hi, I'm Harmy Dylan, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, with an important update about our work here in the department. This month, the Civil Rights Division has started a Second Amendment section, and I'm really excited about this. For the first time, the DOJ Civil Rights Division and the DOJ at large will be protecting and advancing our citizens' right to bear arms as part of our civil rights work. As Attorney General Pam Bondi has said, the Second Amendment is not a second-class right, and I couldn't agree more with my boss. The Second Amendment was ratified in 1791 as part of the Bill of Rights, and yet it has received less attention from the Supreme Court than some of our other important civil rights. However, recently, the court has really stepped up and made clear that states cannot interfere with the right of law-abiding citizens to carry commonly used firearms. So far, the DOJ Civil Rights Division has sued Los Angeles for unreasonable multi-year delays in granting concealed carry permits. We've supported a couple of cases in different courts through our amicus briefs with the Solicitor General's office. I personally argued the Barnett case in Illinois in the Seventh Circuit, and we did another case in Hawaii challenging that state's unreasonable restrictions. Some of the things we're seeing, and that is going to be the focus of our work around the country, includes multi-$1,000 costs for citizens to apply for concealed carry permits. Other jurisdictions are having unreasonably long delays. Other jurisdictions are outlawing guns that should be protected by the Second Amendment under the recent Supreme Court precedents. Now, everyone here knows that common sense teaches us that a criminal is less likely to attack a house that is guarded by an armed citizen. Secondly, the right to bear arms equalizes the ability of those of us, women, people with disabilities, and others who might otherwise be more vulnerable, to be able to protect ourselves. And this is important. And I don't mean to detract from law enforcement. They have a very important role as well. But the Second Amendment was passed, and as the Federalist Papers and other founding documents make clear, to allow citizens the individual right to bear arms for lawful purposes. We will be protecting that right here in this Department of Justice. The president issued an executive order making this clear just 2 weeks into his tenure, and I've been working on the Second Amendment section ever since I got here to the DOJ. So stay tuned. You're going to see a lot more action from this Department of Justice to protect your Second Amendment rights. Thanks.
That's fantastic stuff. Great news. Now, with that said, I know a lot of you out there have criticized the Department of Justice for some of the arguments they've made that are not according to Hoyle. So what I want to do in this video is here. I want to outline how I would assess and how I would identify issues, if there are any, that the U.S. Department of Justice can improve on when it comes to enforcing and protecting our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Because I want to be very precise here. We should applaud them when they do good, 100%. You want to encourage people, if they do good, they make wise choices, they make good arguments, you want to applaud them. You want to encourage them to continue doing good stuff. If there's areas where they're doing okay, but there's room for improvement, we should identify where we think the improvement should come from, how we think the improvement should occur, what should be done better. And then, of course, if there's scenarios or situations where we think the U.S. Department of Justice is simply on the wrong path, they're making the wrong arguments, they're doing the wrong strategic decision, in our opinion, right? They may have access to information we don't have. That we can't control from the outside. But with that said, if we see something where they're on the wrong path or they're doing something we think is wrong or faulty or problematic, we should flag it and be very precise and be like, look, this is not right. And I think it's fair game. And I suspect that anyone that truly supports the right to keep and bear arms would like to know if someone thinks they're making a mistake, because no one wants to make a mistake. And frankly, when you're super busy with any job, it's very easy to overlook certain things. Now, with that said, I would also, when I assess or when I look at what the Department of Justice is doing, the good, the bad, and the ugly areas of improvement, whatever it is, I think we also have to understand that the Department of Justice has over 10,000 attorneys with a lot of different divisions doing a lot of different things, okay? And in light of that, I think we should break down in a detailed fashion the different parts of the U.S. Department of Justice that they do, the things they do, the things they don't do, and when we comment and criticize or compliment the DOJ, we should consider the category that we're talking about. So for example, the first category that I see that is the most important category of work the Department of Justice does involving our Second Amendment rights is in the court system, okay? And I would say that this is the categories within that box. So if you have the court system box, if you will, the lawsuit litigation position box or category, what would I put in there in terms of how to break down? And some are more important than others. So for example, the most important thing, in my opinion, the most important part of what the Department of Justice does when it comes to our Second Amendment rights in America is what they say, what they argue, and what they push toward the United States Supreme Court. Because a win at the Supreme Court can be multi-generational, right? We're literally arguing in the U.S. Supreme Court today in the 21st century, the Humphreys executor decision from the 1930s. So Supreme Court precedent, even if it's wrong, like Humphreys executor was from the 1930s, it can be with us for, a century. I'm not saying that anything that's happened with the Second Amendment was necessarily wrong, but the point is that the most important thing is to win and advance the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms at the Supreme Court. There's nothing more important than that because it's multi-generational, it's multi-administration. So if you flip over and have a Democrat in the White House, you still have that Supreme Court precedent that's on the books, and that's very helpful. So the first thing is, what is the Solicitor General's office doing under John Sauer to advance the Second Amendment rights? Do we think they're doing a good job, bad job? Is there anything they could be doing better? That's the first sort of subcategory under the overall category of what's going on in the litigation posture, the litigation strategy and activity of the Department of Justice. Then, of course, the question is what's going on in the U.S. Courts of Appeals across the country. And if I were running the Department of Justice, which I'm not, I would make sure that every single Second Amendment related brief, everything talking about the Gun Control Act, everything talking about the National Firearms Act, everything talking about the Second Amendment gets vetted specifically by John Sauer's team in the Solicitor General's office, preferably by John Sauer himself, as well as by Harmy Dylan and her team over there in the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And I would make sure that the positions and the briefs and the arguments being vetted are being vetted by these people at the Court of Appeals level. Because remember, winning and losing at the Court of Appeals level, since the U.S. Supreme Court takes so few cases, in many respects is dispositive for decades. So if you win a particular Second Amendment issue in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit or the First Circuit in Boston, the Second Circuit in New York City, whatever it is, the millions of people living in that particular jurisdiction will have to live with that decision because there's a good chance the Supreme Court will not get around to it in the near future to fix a problem. So it's very important that the Court of Appeals level, the Department of Justice take the proper Second Amendment positions. And then, of course, you have the district court level. Now, here's the critical distinction I'm going to make here. We have to keep in mind that you have two divisions at the Department of Justice that litigate cases. You have the criminal division that determines what cases to charge, who to indict, who to try to put in prison. And then you have the civil division, which has two things. One is they have the authority to sue on behalf of Second Amendment rights and other civil rights. That has occurred against the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office for slow walking permits, allegedly. So you have the criminal division. So in the criminal division, I would have meetings. If I were in charge of the DOJ, I would talk to the criminal division and tell them that there's certain criteria we want met before they charge anyone with a crime under the Gun Control Act or the National Firearms Act. Specifically, again, I would be saying, look, unless these people pose a violent danger to America, you should not be indicting people for anything other than a physically violent danger under the Gun Control Act or the National Firearms Act, because if it's a malum prohibitum crime, a BS paperwork crime, I would skip that altogether. And that would be a very clear memo and message I would send to the criminal division down there at the trial court level, the line attorneys that do the daily grind work for the Department of Justice in the courts every single day in the trial courts of the district courts. And then when it comes to the civil division, I would break that down into two parts. You obviously want to make sure you're bringing the proper lawsuits on behalf of the Second Amendment to vindicate Second Amendment rights against these rogue jurisdictions, the New York Cities of the world, the Chicagos of the world, the Illinois of the world, the Californias of the world, the Hawaiis of the world. That is critically important. But you also want to make sure, and this is where there's probably room for improvement, that when the Department of Justice or the U.S. government is sued under the Gun Control Act or the National Firearms Act, where there's constitutional challenges being brought involving the Second Amendment, I would be very careful to make sure that even if you're the Department of Justice and you feel that under Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution that says the president must take care to faithfully execute or defend American federal law, you have to at least, at a minimum, make sure that the methodological interpretation, the methodological arguments you're making about what does Bruin stand for, what is dangerous and unusual, what is a physically violent, dangerous person under 922G and the like, you got to at least make sure that your methodology is correct. So even if you're at the Department of Justice and you're going to try to argue in favor of some existing federal gun law, you at least need to make sure that your methodology, that you're articulating, your interpretation, your precedents that you're citing to is consistent with the view of a broad interpretation in favor of the freedoms associated with the right to keep and bear arms, because you don't want your line attorneys either in these criminal cases in some random district in Alaska or your civil lawyers defending some NFA case saying something stupid in the Western District of Texas that's going to get you blown up in the media and whatnot. So you want to be very careful to make sure that your line attorneys at the trial level are trying to make the right arguments. And keep in mind, I understand there's 10,000 lawyers. That's right, 10,000 lawyers or something in the Department of Justice. It's very hard to make sure that every one of them is towing the line and not screwing stuff up either on purpose because they hate the administration, they hate Trump, they're deep state operatives, or possibly they're just not competent or they don't understand the Second Amendment. A lot of people don't understand the Second Amendment. They make stupid mistakes all the time because they're unfamiliar with it. So whatever it is, you got to make sure, if you're at the Department of Justice, in my opinion, you try to make sure that the line attorneys in the trial courts, the first level of fighting, at least get the Second Amendment methodology correct, whatever it is they're going to argue in court. Now, beyond the court system, there's other things that the Department of Justice does. It's very important. I would say the next big category is the Pardon Office. This is the Restoration of Rights program that is getting ready to be fully functionally turned on under Section 925. I know there's been work that's done to get this lined up. There's a process that takes time, but now that is come and gone, and it's now able to turn on that Section 925 case, and you need to start restoring the Second Amendment rights of tens of thousands of Americans with speed to get that done. That is extremely important because there's a lot of people that are convicted of nonsense, nonviolent administrative crimes that are technically felonies under 18 U.S.C. 922G, and those need to be cleaned out of the system and their rights restored under that pardon office / 925 restoration process. And that is something that you can point to when you do the next category of things that I think the DOJ needs to worry about or be concerned with, and that is the public relations. Because one of the things I mentioned earlier in this video is the Overton window. The Overton window is the understanding, the acceptability of certain positions, and we want the right to keep and bear arms, the Overton window, to continue to expand in favor of the right to keep and bear arms. And one of the things that can be done here, in my view, is to have members of the Department of Justice. It could be Attorney General Pam Bondi, could be Harmy Dylan, could be John Sauer, whatever. I know everyone's very busy, but it would have them go out and speak to Second Amendment groups. For example, why are you not going to SHOT Show? You should go to SHOT Show. Maybe go to the Gundies, give a presentation there, or wherever you're going to go, at least give a speech to, the Gun Owners of America Second Amendment Foundation event, or, the NRA, whatever it is. But I think that part of what the DOJ needs to be doing when it comes to the Second Amendment community is going out to these Second Amendment related events and talking to the people and explaining their position. And if there's something that people disagree with, hear what people have to say about it and respond accordingly. Say, well, we think you have to do that because of some blah, 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 whatever the reason is. Or, yeah, you're right, we need to look into this more. Whatever it is, I think that there needs to be more interaction between the Second Amendment community and the Department of Justice. And one way to get that done is for the Department of Justice to go out and do events and meet with Second Amendment people on the ground at places like, NRA conventions or whatever it might be, Gun Owners of America, Second Amendment Foundation. You get the point. And the last point I want to make is the notion of grants. Remember, the Department of Justice has, hundreds of millions of dollars, if not $1 billion available for grants. And if I were running the Department of Justice, I would look to move some of that grant money that was created by the Biden administration to give it away to anti-gun so-called community organization groups to basically advance the anti-Second Amendment agenda. I would pull that money back, and I would, if you have to spend it, because you may have to spend it because Congress gave you the money, if you have the money, then I would start to spend it on grants appropriately. I would, for example, want to redo the studies to show that defensive gun uses are very important, that there's a lot of defensive gun uses in the United States. Maybe I would do a study on the number of AR-15s and semi-automatic rifles in the United States. Maybe I would redo some of the Gary Kleck studies from, I think, the 1970s, 1980s, where Gary Kleck went into the prison system and, as I recall, talked to criminals about how do they pick their victims? And it turned out that when you ask criminals in prison how they pick their victims, they overwhelmingly said that one of the things they looked for was whether or not the person was armed. And he was armed, they'd skip him and go to the person they thought was not armed, and so on and so on. So these are the sort of studies that I would be funding at the Department of Justice with the existing money available for grants. So with that said, to make a long story short, I'm extremely excited that the Second Amendment unit has been turned on. I think there's a lot of potential here. And again, when we assess in the Second Amendment community the good and the bad and the ugly, room for improvement, any areas of criticism, we should at least be very precise exactly what the issue is. And again, when they do good stuff, we want to encourage the Department of Justice and the Trump administration to continue down that path. And again, if there's an issue or something, you should flag it. But when you flag it, be very precise. And I hope this video helps people be very precise and specific if they have any concerns about a legal position taken by the DOJ or something else they're doing, because clearly they support the Second Amendment. Clearly they care about the Second Amendment. So in my opinion, we should be encouraging them to do more of this. All right, folks, there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure you follow me on X at 4boxes. Don't forget to subscribe both to YouTube and to Rumble, and I'll see you again real soon here at the 4 Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.